I always knew how to recognize when his tone changed. It wasn't the same as yelling. Yelling is obvious, loud, easy to point out. His real violence lived in the details, and the way his voice grew lower, sharper, as if every word were a blade carefully chosen to cut without leaving marks on the skin. And over the years, I learned to swallow each of those blades the way one swallows water. Automatic, thoughtless, without reacting. But that day, something broke. It was late in the afternoon, after an entire day in which he had already noticed. Even if he wouldn't, he admitted that I wasn't exactly the same woman who had woken up in that house so many mornings before. I had already failed in my obedience reflexes, delayed half a second in responding to a command, remained silent when he expected me to shrink. And that kind of change, no matter how small, terrifies men who live off the fragility of others. I was setting the dinner table when he walked into the kitchen. The air grew heavier, but not like before. Before, I felt the weight sink into me. Now, it was as if the weight hit something I didn't know I had. A kind of silent, invisible shield that I didn't yet understand that was there. He approached slowly, like someone trying to regain control without admitting he had lost it. He took the plate from my hands with a bit of force, not enough to physically hurt me, but enough to mark territory. He always did that. Small gestures that said, "Remember who's in charge?" And then he said it, the sentence. The one I had heard for years, absorbed, internalized, cried over, and blamed myself for believing was true. "You're not even good for this." 5 words. 5. Small, old, repeated, familiar in their cruelty. For so long, those 5 words entered me like a verdict. I believed them. I shaped myself to fit inside them. They defined my nights, my days, my fears, my self-worth. I built my entire emotional life trying to avoid hearing that exact sentence. But that day, when they left his mouth, they didn't enter me. They hit something new, still thin, still fragile, still recent, but real. Something that was being born. And when they hit it, they didn't pass through. They echoed. They bounced back. As if, without realizing it, I had closed the inner door where I stored all my old wounds. I slowly lifted my face, not in defiance, not in obvious courage, but in something deeper, awareness. I looked at him as if I were seeing a stranger, as if, for the first time, I realized those words said far more about him than about me, as if the lens he had always used to diminish me had finally shattered. He noticed. He saw in my eyes that something was wrong with the scene. "What are you looking at?" he asked, trying to rebalance the situation. I didn't answer. Not because I was afraid, but because there was no longer an answer to give. His sentence had nowhere to go inside me. The place where it used to live was empty, abandoned, silent. And that's when, for the first time, I felt something that seemed dangerous even to myself. Indignation. Not the loud, explosive kind that slams tables and screams. Mine was calm, low, internal. An indignation that doesn't make noise, it makes change. I turned away and continued setting the table, just like that, as if that sentence had never existed. And that was the hardest blow he had ever received from me, because the dynamic of our relationship had always been built on one premise. I needed to react. I needed to fear. I needed to absorb. I needed to believe. When I stopped doing that, he lost the stage. He lost the script. He lost the audience. And he realized he was losing the only thing that truly mattered to him: power. He came closer than I would have liked. I felt the hot air of his breath on my neck, something that had always paralyzed me. But in that moment, my body didn't freeze. I didn't step back. My heart raced, yes, but not with fear, with clarity. "Do you think you're better than me now?" he whispered. I didn't answer, because it wasn't about being better. It was about finally understanding that I was never less. He waited. I didn't react. He stepped away, irritated. trying to regain control through volume, through rough movements, through the look that always forced me to look away. But I didn't look away, I just breathed. And then I realized I didn't need to yell, I didn't need to argue, I didn't need to win. I just needed to stop swallowing. And that day, I didn't swallow. I spent the rest of the night with a different kind of silence in my chest. Not an oppressive silence, not the one he used to oppose his punishment, but a silence that was mine. A silence that seemed to say, I am still here, and you no longer decide where my courage is allowed to be born. And it was there, in the kitchen of that house that erased me so many times, that I realized a woman doesn't need screams to change her life. Sometimes everything begins with a sentence you simply choose not to accept anymore. That sentence of his fatal verdict was the first one I let fall to the ground without letting it enter me. And that was how my courage, still small, still shy, began to speak. No longer in whispers, no longer hidden, but in its own voice. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. And make sure to watch the next video, where the story continues in the next section or in the next series, as this quiet courage begins to reshape everything.